A few years ago, I had a terrifying experience that I will never forget. It all happened on a Saturday when my aunt and uncle were moving their restaurant to a new location. They had a lot of large equipment that needed to be transported, and I, along with my future husband, cousin, and about 10 other people, mostly employees, were helping out. At the old restaurant, we were busy packing and tying things down when we ran out of ratchet straps. Seeing the urgency of the situation, I offered to go to my parents' house and fetch more straps from my dad. Since everyone else was occupied with the movie, I set out alone on the mission. On my way back, my aunt called me to let me know that they were all going to take a load to the new location, and she instructed me to meet them there. The problem was, I didn't know how to get to the new place, so I pulled over in a nearby park to input the address into my GPS. The dense trees blocked the view of the parking lot from the road, and an odd detail that escaped my notice at the time was that despite the sunny weekend, there were no other cars in the lot. I parked my small SUV in a spot and focused on my phone, unaware that I hadn't put the car in park, which would have unlocked the doors. Suddenly, I felt a massive impact and heard a loud noise. I looked up and saw a man standing outside my window. His pupils were dilated, making it impossible to see the color of his eyes. He leaned over to peer inside, and I realized he had to be much taller than me to reach the window in this manner. Panic set in as he desperately tried to open the door, growing visibly upset when it wouldn't budge. His frustration turned into aggression as he began pounding the window with his fists, swinging his arm repeatedly. Fear consumed me, and without thinking, I reached for the camping knife I kept in my car door. Holding it in my hand, I caught his gaze, and he smiled wickedly. It was then that I understood his intentions were far more sinister than robbery or assault. He wanted to kill me. Despite my knife, I knew that physically, I wouldn't stand a chance against him. His size and strength were overwhelming. As he continued his assault on the car, I realized that the doors were somehow locked, and I couldn't unlock them. The panic intensified when he turned his attention to the backseat door. If he got into the trunk, he could easily make his way to me over the back seats. He struck the back window with both his fists, yelling incomprehensible words. In that moment, a desperate plan formed in my mind. I could try to reverse out of there. I dropped the knife in my lap, shifted the gear into reverse, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and floored the gas pedal. I don't know if I hit him, or if he managed to get out of the way in time, and I didn't dare look back. I quickly shifted into drive and sped out of the parking lot, ignoring the stop sign in my panic. To this day, I still can't fathom why I didn't put the car in park earlier. A small oversight that saved my life. The memory of that day haunts me, and I am forever grateful that I managed to escape that horrifying encounter unharmed. All right, folks, buckle up for a spine-chilling tale that happened not too long ago. It all started when me, 19 years old, and my two buddies, 20 and 17 years old, decided to go fishing on the riverbank one afternoon. Picture this: a scenic spot with a levee you drive over, leading to a boat ramp and parking area right by the river, armed with pizza, beer, weed, music, and of course, our fishing rods. We hoped for a fun-filled evening of late-night fishing. As the sun started to set, we were all settled on the bank, comfortably seated in our chairs with music playing, having a grand old time. It had been a good 2 hours, and the clock struck 9 p.m. The beer had us feeling pretty good, and the atmosphere was just right. But then, out of nowhere, the peaceful ambiance was shattered by the arrival of two cars blaring music at deafening levels. It seemed like these cars were carrying 4 or 5 people each, but we couldn't understand their conversation as it was all in Spanish. Nonetheless, we tried to ignore the disturbance and continue our evening. Unfortunately, things took a dark turn. The noise escalated to such an unbearable level that we couldn't enjoy ourselves anymore. Glass shattered, people screamed, and we suspected an intense argument unfolding just 20 feet behind us, concealed from their view. Suddenly, we heard the unmistakable sound of someone being punched repeatedly, followed by a splash in the river near the boat ramp. The chilling words, "Nah, leave him," were the only English we could make out amidst the chaos. We were petrified by what we had just heard, and we knew it was time to make a hasty retreat. We packed up our belongings and started making our way back up the steep incline to reach our car. As we came into the view of the group, they quickly scrambled back into their cars and sped away over the levee. But that wasn't the end of the fright. One car lingered at the top of the levee, creeping forward ominously. We wasted no time and immediately started our car. But as soon as we did, that car decided to go all the way over the levee. It was just us left in the parking lot, and the darkness had fully engulfed the surroundings by then. Feeling the need to sober up completely and escape the eerie scene, we drove back over the levee. However, just as we took the sharp left turn, our hearts dropped. We were met with a bone-chilling sight. 4 cars lined up horizontally across the road, effectively blocking our path. With orchards on both sides, there was no escape route. Panic set in, and one of my buddies bravely decided to gun it straight towards the gap between the cars, even if it meant potentially damaging the front end of his car. Incredibly, one of the 4 cars slightly moved, creating just enough space for us to squeeze through. We wasted no time in making our escape, leaving those cars honking in the distance as we sped away. We still can't fathom what their intentions were that night. With 2 cars at the boat ramp where we were fishing and 2 more on the other side of the levee, blocking the road, it was a night filled with pure terror and mystery. I filed a police report, concerned that they might have dumped a body into the river, something that's been known to happen in this area, but haven't heard anything back yet. Without a doubt, this was one of the most terrifying experiences of our lives, and we'll be forever haunted by that eerie night on the riverbank. I've told this story probably over 100 times, and despite being the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me, I've come to appreciate that makes for a great story, so I figure I'll share it with you all here. I should start by saying that I always hated going camping. My parents sent me to summer camp every year in Colorado, which involved at least one camping trip into the woods. Despite the brevity of these trips, I always resented them. The heavy bag, the lack of toilets, the spiders that always found their way into my tent. When I turned 16 and became a camp counselor in training, however, my distaste for the whole experience briefly changed. At that age, we were only a few years older than the oldest campers, but we were given considerable leeway in what we were allowed to do. Most nights, we would have to stay in the cabin with our campers, but it was rumored that the camping trip was a time where the counselors in training would get drunk, smoke weed, and hook up with each other after everyone else went to sleep. What I didn't know, however, was that the events of that camping trip would dissuade me from ever going camping in the woods again. The trip began as any other. Altogether, there were around 30 people on the trip. 4 counselors in training, 4 counselors, and around 20 or so boys and girls, between the ages of 13 and 14, walking in a single file line, up and down the various trails. You could hardly hear any sounds of nature over the conversations and laughter of the campers. Several hours went by, and we made our way through a dense marshy area and up a steep incline, populated with evergreens and aspens. I wasn't the most athletic kid, so it was around this point that I found myself at the back of the line with one of the other counselors in training, Jordan, as well as 2 campers who were also struggling to keep up. The 4 of us started chatting, and in our distracted state, we began to fall more and more behind the rest of the campers, until the last of them faded out of view around a bend about 50 feet up the way. Unconcerned, we kept walking at the same slow pace, but after 30 minutes or so, the trail started to level off, and I began to feel increasingly anxious. Not only had the rest of the group disappeared ahead of us, but we had entered a stretch of completely dead evergreens, half of which looked scorched by a wildfire, and the other half appeared to have been killed by a disease. The eeriness of the landscape was punctuated by a small derelict cabin sitting in the middle of the scorched forest. but seemingly untouched by the fire that must have spread through the area. We were so enraptured by the scene that one of the campers screamed when a twig broke behind us. Jordan and I started laughing a bit, but we quickly stopped when we turned to look at where the sound had come from. Not 20 feet behind us was a haggard-looking man with a messy nest of black hair and a long black beard slowly making his way up the trail with his eyes locked on us. He didn't appear to have any hiking supplies on him, and we had no idea how long he had been walking behind us. Finally, we managed to catch up to the rest of the group, who'd been waiting for us, and we told the adult counselors about our interaction with the man. They just shrugged it off, telling us that the guy probably lived in that cabin and just wanted to know what we were doing near his property. Still, I felt unnerved by the encounter, and when we finally arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had somehow followed us. Eventually, though, I put it out of my mind and managed to enjoy myself a bit. Everyone else had gone to bed, and Jordan and the other counselor in training from the boys' cabin had brought 2 warm Mike's Harders that they had stolen from the counselor's quarters. And I took out a joint I had stashed away for this exact occasion. To avoid getting in trouble, we decided to hike out into the woods a bit to smoke the joint, and we made our way to the edge of the river where we had washed our pots and pans earlier in the day. The spot was eerily silent, and the thought of the man from earlier kept popping into my head. I don't know what time it was, but it must have been quite late when I suddenly woke up to the distinct sounds of footsteps walking around near my tent. Shot with adrenaline, I tried to lay as still as possible and quiet my breathing. From the sound, it was apparent that someone was less than 3 feet away from the front of my tent, seemingly pacing back and forth. I turned to wake up Jordan, but I was immediately put at ease when I saw that he wasn't next to me. Assuming Jordan was the one I had been hearing, I closed my eyes and I was just beginning to drift back to sleep when I heard the tent unzip. I felt Jordan lie down next to me, and after a few moments he put his arms around me and began to spoon me. After nearly drifting off to sleep again, I realized I had to go to the bathroom and muttered something about having to go pee before beginning to unzip my sleeping bag. Seemingly annoyed by the noise, Jordan lazily turned over, pulling his hoodie up over his head, before going still again. Quietly, so as not to wake him, I unzipped the tent and quickly scanned the campsite for any movement. Comforting myself that Jordan had just gone pee and was fine, I put my shoes on and began making the trek across our campsite to the designated pee zone. I had just made it to the area and pulled my pants down when I heard rustling coming from the campsite, as if someone was rummaging through our supplies and bags. Still slightly drunk, I tried to pull my pants up, and in my haste, I lost my balance and tried to catch myself with a branch that made a loud snapping noise when I grabbed it. I tried to gather myself as quietly as I could, but when I finally managed to look up, I could see that there was a figure making its way across our campsite in my direction. Before I could even think, I was blinded by the bright light of a flashlight, shining directly into my eyes, and the light was getting bigger. So whoever it was, they were coming toward me. Frozen and panicked, the figure got 10 feet away from me before I heard Jordan's voice say sorry. It's just me. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then Jordan asked me something that really confused me. Have you seen my blue hoodie? I know you gave it back to me, but I think one of campers might have stolen it from my bag while I was sleeping. After a brief pause, I managed to stutter out, but you were just wearing it when you got back in the tent. What he said next made my blood run cold. What are you talking about? He said, it's been missing since we got back from the river. I even went down there to see if I had left it by accident. But after I couldn't find it, I thought I'd check the boys' bags, and that's when I saw you. My confusion quickly turned to sheer terror as I realized that the man who got into the tent with me just moments prior hadn't been Jordan. Sensing that something was wrong, Jordan asked me what happened, and I managed to get out that whoever stole his hoodie was sleeping in our tent. Not believing me, Jordan insisted on walking back to the tent to check it out. As slowly and quietly as possible, we made our way to the side of the tent, and when Jordan flipped on his flashlight and shined it through the nylon lining, he let out a high-pitched scream. We could both see the clear outline of a man's shadow, lying still, inside our tent. What happened next is a bit of a blur, but we ran to the pod of tents on the other side of the campground, where the older counselors were sleeping, and frantically unzipped their tent and started yelling for them to come out, and that there was a man in our tent. I remember panic setting in as our counselors slowly and groggily woke up. But after a bit more of frantic yelling, they finally managed to understand the severity of the situation when a commotion broke out on the other side of camp, near our tent. By the time they ran to the scene, however, they only found an unzipped tent and a bunch of our things littered on the ground that the man had apparently knocked over or thrown during his escape. Assuming that I was cold, not anxious, Jordan gave me his blue hoodie, and this prompted one of the other girls to suggest that we switch tents for the night, so I could sleep in the same tent with him, and she could sleep in the same tent as the other boy. I had absolutely no problem with this, and after smoking the joint, we made our way back to our tents, which were pitched slightly away from the others, and we discreetly sipped on the Mike's harders while telling scary camping stories. Some time passed, and one of the boys was in the middle of telling a rather muddled story that he was clearly making up on the spot when he suddenly stopped. In the silence, we could hear what sounded like footsteps crunching on pine needles about 40 feet away, near one of the other campers' tents. As we strained to listen to what was going on, the noises stopped, and even though we assumed it was just one of the campers getting up to go to the bathroom, being stoned and hopped up from the scary stories, we decided to call it a night and go hide in our tents. Jordan followed suit, and we awkwardly made out before eventually going to sleep. Being young, we were naturally pretty freaked out, but Jordan managed to give the guy a slight wave before saying to the rest of us, "Come on, let's speed up and get back with the rest of the group." As we turned to continue our way up the path, the man mumbled a question that was hard to hear, and I was shocked when Jordan turned around to ask the man to repeat himself. The man muttered again, slightly louder, "Going camping." Jordan answered the man that, yes, we are going camping, to which the man smiled slightly before stating in a creepy and ominous voice, "Better be careful." We nodded and gave a half-hearted thank you before continuing on to try to find the rest of the group, this time with a much faster pace. Although the man had been walking up the same trail as us when we saw him, he didn't continue, but instead just stood there in the middle of the trail, watching us as made our way up the winding path and disappeared from his view. After that, we heard the counselors radioing back down to the camp to call the police, and we could tell that they were as scared as we were. I don't think any of us slept after that. Luckily, we only had to wait a few hours for the sun to come up, and by that time, a few of the other counselors had arrived with guns to escort us back to camp. On our way back down, one of the campers found Jordan's jacket tied around one of the trees on the path, like some kind of marker. Needless to say, he didn't want the hoodie back, and we just left it there. To this day, I can't say for certain that the man in the tent was the same guy that we ran into earlier on the trail, but his face and that night still haunt me.